The sharp wailing sound of an air raid siren cuts through the night sky in Ouagadougou. Streetlights flicker, families rush to close their doors, and the usually bustling market streets fall eerily silent. In one small apartment, a grandmother pulls her two grandchildren close, whispering prayers under her breath, her eyes fixed on the distant glow of armored vehicles moving through the city. This is not just another tense evening in Burkina Faso, it is a moment that could shape the nation's future. Reports have emerged of an unprecedented military incident involving weapons rarely seen in this part of Africa. Witnesses speak of troop convoys carrying advanced rifles, mounted machine guns, and rocket-propelled grenade launchers. The local hospital confirms they have already treated over a dozen civilians for shrapnel wounds in the last hour alone. The people here are no strangers to conflict, but tonight feels different. There is an uneasy sense that the stakes have been raised, that the situation has moved beyond the usual pattern of insurgent attacks. The name on everyone's lips is Ibrahim Traoré, the young, determined leader who has become both a symbol of defiance and a lightning rod for controversy. Many believe he is the only one standing between Burkina Faso and complete chaos. Others fear that his bold moves may provoke forces too powerful to control. In a small village outside the capital, a farmer named Issa stares at his darkened fields, unable to sleep. He worries about whether the road to the city will be blocked in the morning and whether he will be able to get his produce to market. He wonders if his teenage son, who works in the city, will make it home safely this week. These are the human questions behind the headlines, the fears that shape everyday life when national security hangs in the balance. And so the question that hangs over this night is both urgent and deeply personal. Will Ibrahim Traoré save Burkina Faso or lead it into even greater danger? If you have ever worried about the safety of your family and the stability of your home, stay with this story, because what happens here could change more than just one country's fate. The events of that night began hours before the sirens wailed. Intelligence sources in the capital had been tracking unusual military movements along the northern corridor of Burkina Faso, near an area known for both insurgent activity and key mineral transport routes. By late afternoon, witnesses reported convoys of at least 24 vehicles, some marked with national military insignia, others with no visible markings, moving toward the outskirts of Ouagadougou. Soldiers in desert camouflage carried Belgian-made FN FAL rifles, while gunners stood ready behind mounted DSHK heavy machine guns. According to early reports from a local security analyst, a small number of foreign-made drones were also spotted overhead, their presence raising questions about outside involvement. By evening, the target became clear: a military depot on the edge of the city, believed to house both ammunition stockpiles and recently acquired armored personnel carriers. Around 8:45 p.m., bursts of gunfire echoed across the district. Residents saw tracer rounds streaking through the night sky, and within minutes, the first explosions lit up the horizon. Emergency responders confirmed that at least 3 civilian homes near the depot were damaged, sending families scrambling into the streets with whatever belongings they could grab. One of those families belonged to Miriam, a schoolteacher in her mid-40s. She had been marking homework papers when the first blast rattled her windows. In the chaos, she bundled her 2 children into the back of a neighbor's pickup truck and drove toward the central hospital, unsure if they were fleeing danger or heading straight into it. Later, Miriam would describe the moment she saw Ibrahim Traoré's motorcade pass by on the opposite lane, her first glimpse of the man whose leadership would now be tested under the harshest conditions. The government's initial statement, broadcast just after 10 p.m., described the incident as an act of sabotage targeting national defense assets. No mention was made of casualties, though unofficial sources spoke of several injured soldiers and multiple civilians needing urgent care. The Defense Ministry claimed that the attackers had been repelled, but eyewitnesses insisted that sporadic gunfire continued well into the night. Military experts point to a convergence of motives for the attack. The depot was not only a strategic military site, it was also a symbol of Burkina Faso's recent shift towards self-reliance in defense, including the procurement of equipment from non-traditional partners. This realignment has angered both insurgent groups and reportedly certain foreign stakeholders with long-standing economic and security interests in the region. The attack may have been an attempt to send a message that the country's new path would not go unchallenged. In the countryside, the ripple effects were immediate. Issa, the farmer from earlier, woke to find the main highway into the city blocked by military checkpoints. Trucks carrying onions, millet, and livestock were lined up for miles. Soldiers checked every cargo bed, every crate, slowing commerce to a near standstill. For small-scale farmers who rely on daily market sales, even a single day of disruption means lost income they can ill afford. It's not just about today, Issa explained to a visiting journalist. If people are afraid to come to the market tomorrow, we lose twice, once in money and once in trust. By dawn, the city's rhythm had been upended. Schools remained closed, government offices operated on skeleton staff, and rumors spread faster than any official update. Social media lit up with conflicting accounts, some claiming foreign mercenaries were involved, others insisting it was a purely domestic act by a rogue faction within the army. The uncertainty only deepened the sense of vulnerability. In the midst of this confusion, Traoré convened an emergency meeting with his top military and intelligence officials. Reports suggest the discussion centered on whether to declare a state of emergency, a move that would grant the government sweeping powers, but could also heighten fears of authoritarian overreach. For a leader who rose to power promising to restore stability, the decision was a delicate one: act too cautiously and risk emboldening aggressors, act too forcefully and risk alienating allies at home and abroad. And so the city waited, shops, half-shuttered eyes glued to radios and television screens for the next move from the man at the center of it all. But as the hours passed, one question grew louder in the minds of citizens and observers alike. What exactly had triggered this brazen assault on Burkina Faso's defenses? Was it simply another episode in the country's long fight against insurgency? Or was there a deeper, more dangerous game being played? If you have ever watched events spiral beyond a community's control and wondered who is truly pulling the strings, stay with this story, because the answer may change how you see not just Burkina Faso, but the entire Sahel region. By midday the following day, the tension that had gripped Ouagadougou reached its breaking point. The government had remained largely silent through the morning, issuing only brief security advisories. Then, without warning, state television cut into its regular programming. The screen faded to the image of Ibrahim Traoré standing at a podium, flanked by two senior military commanders. His uniform was crisp, his beret set at a sharp angle, and his voice carried none of the hesitation that had marked some earlier public appearances. In a firm, almost defiant tone, Traoré declared, "We will not be intimidated by those who seek to undermine our sovereignty. Our response will be decisive. We will defend Burkina Faso with every resource at our disposal." The statement was more than rhetoric; it was a public commitment to escalation if necessary. He announced immediate deployment of additional troops to the northern border, intensified intelligence operations, and a crackdown on suspected collaborators. The reaction across the capital was immediate and intense. In the central square, hundreds of supporters gathered, waving Burkina Faso flags and chanting slogans of unity. Many wore T-shirts bearing Traoré's image. Others held homemade signs reading "Hands off our land" and "Sahel United." For these citizens, the speech was a rallying cry, a sign that their leader would not bend under pressure. But not everyone reacted with optimism. In a small cafe just a few streets away, a group of older residents watched the broadcast in silence. Among them was Joseph, a retired civil servant who had lived through multiple coups. He sipped his tea slowly before saying, "Strong words are one thing, but they can also invite stronger enemies." His friends nodded, aware that every action taken now could ripple far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Internationally, the statement was met with a mix of concern and calculation. Regional allies within the Alliance of Sahel States (AES) expressed solidarity with Mali and Niger, issuing near-identical declarations of support. However, diplomatic sources suggested that behind closed doors, some leaders worried about being drawn into a wider conflict. The climax of the day's events came not from the speech alone, but from what followed within hours. In an unconfirmed but widely circulated report, a convoy of government forces intercepted an armed group traveling toward a mining site in the eastern region, a site operated by a foreign consortium. According to security officials, the group was carrying explosives, assault rifles, and satellite communication gear. The discovery fueled speculation that the initial attack on the depot was part of a broader plan targeting Burkina Faso's economic assets, not just its military infrastructure. This revelation shifted the tone of discussions in both political and civilian circles. The idea that economic sabotage could be intertwined with armed conflict hit close to home for many, especially those who relied on the mining sector for jobs and local development. One miner, Adama, who had just completed a night shift, said bluntly, "If they shut down the mines, it's not just the soldiers who suffer, it's every family in this town." The government's swift action in intercepting the convoy was praised by some as proof of Traoré's resolve. Yet critics pointed out the risk of retaliation and the possibility that more such groups were already operating undetected. The question of how far the government would go to root out perceived threats especially if they involved foreign entities, became a heated topic on local radio talk shows. As evening fell, the city's main avenues were still dotted with military checkpoints. Armored vehicles patrolled in pairs, their mounted guns silhouetted against the setting sun. In the residential districts, families kept their children indoors, the normal evening chatter replaced by the low hum of battery-powered radios. The air was thick with a strange mix of pride, anxiety, and defiance. And yet, despite the day's dramatic turn, one pressing question lingered in the minds of many: would the outside world step in either to support Burkina Faso's sovereignty or to push back against Traoré's uncompromising stance? The stakes were no longer confined to a single depot or a single city. They now touched on the balance of power in the entire Sahel region. If you have ever wondered how quickly a local crisis can become a regional turning point and whether the world will act before it's too late, stay with this story, because the next move may come from far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The days following the depot attack brought visible changes to daily life in Burkina Faso. Markets that had once been filled with the sounds of bargaining and laughter now opened late, if at all. Many vendors reported fewer customers, not because people didn't need food or supplies, but because travel itself had become risky. Roadblocks and vehicle searches were now standard, especially on routes connecting rural areas to the capital. For families already living on the edge of poverty, the disruptions were devastating. Mariam, the school teacher who had fled with her children during the first night's explosions, returned home only to find her street half deserted. Several neighbors had left to stay with relatives in safer regions, fearing further attacks. At her school, fewer than half the students had returned, and many parents sent word that they would keep their children at home until the security situation stabilized. "It's not just the fighting we fear," she said. "It's the uncertainty. No one knows when it will flare up again." The human toll extended beyond the capital. In the eastern mining town where Adama worked, production was slowed to a crawl as transport routes for minerals were heavily guarded or shut down altogether. Local businesses that depended on mine workers' wages, cafes, small shops, transport services were seeing sharp declines in income. The mayor of the town publicly warned that continued disruption could push unemployment to dangerous levels, possibly fueling the very instability the government was trying to contain. On the political front, Ibrahim Traoré moved quickly to solidify his control. Within a week, his administration pushed through emergency measures granting expanded powers to the military and security services. The laws allowed for extended detention of suspects without formal charges, increased surveillance authority, and tighter restrictions on public gatherings. Supporters argued these steps were necessary to protect the country from infiltration and sabotage. Opponents, however, feared the erosion of civil liberties and the possibility of long-term authoritarian rule. International observers were divided. Human rights organizations expressed concern over the scope of the new measures, while some regional leaders praised Traoré for acting decisively in the face of a national threat. The African Union stopped short of criticism, instead calling for balanced approaches that maintain both security and rights. Within the Alliance of Sahel States, the incident sparked strategic discussions about mutual defense. Mali and Niger offered to send additional troops for joint border patrols, a gesture that bolstered regional solidarity, but also risked drawing the alliance into wider confrontations. Analysts noted that the visible coordination among these nations might deter some aggressors, but could also provoke others who see the AES as a threat to their influence. For ordinary citizens, the political maneuvers felt distant compared to the tangible struggles of everyday life. Food prices were climbing, fuel shortages were reported in several districts, and the black market for basic goods began to thrive. Families like Isa's had to make hard choices, sell livestock early at lower prices, to cover immediate needs or risk losing them entirely if transportation routes remained blocked. The psychological strain was equally profound. Rumors of new attacks circulated almost daily, often amplified by social media posts with little verification. The government's efforts to control the narrative sometimes backfired as citizens grew suspicious when official statements contradicted what people saw on the ground. This gap between perception and official messaging risked eroding public trust, a critical asset for any leader in a time of crisis. Amid these challenges, Traoré's leadership remained the central point of debate. To his supporters, he embodied resilience, willing to take unpopular measures to safeguard the nation. To his critics, he was walking a dangerous line, concentrating too much power in the executive while neglecting the socio-economic consequences of his decisions. The truth, as is often the case, likely lay somewhere in between, but the stakes left little room for error. And so as the country grappled with displacement, economic strain, and a new political order, One question loomed larger with each passing day. How would the United States respond to this evolving situation? Would Washington see Traoré as a stabilizing force worth backing, or as a wild card whose actions could further destabilize the Sahel? If you've ever wondered how external powers weigh their options, when a fragile nation teeters between security and upheaval, stay with this story because the next chapter will take us beyond Burkina Faso's borders. In Washington, the unfolding events in Burkina Faso did not go unnoticed. The State Department released a carefully worded statement expressing deep concern over the recent violence and urging all parties to exercise restraint. Behind the diplomatic language, analysts noted the subtext: the U.S. was watching closely, weighing whether Traoré's leadership would contribute to stability or add another layer of complexity to an already volatile region. Burkina Faso holds no major U.S. military base, but its position in the Sahel makes it strategically important. The region serves as both a buffer and a potential breeding ground for extremist groups that could threaten Western interests. A destabilized Burkina Faso could disrupt counterterrorism coordination, create refugee flows into neighboring states, and open the door for rival powers to expand their influence. European allies echoed the call for restraint, though their focus leaned toward humanitarian concerns. France, once the dominant power in the region, kept its response notably subdued, perhaps mindful of its strained relations with several Sahel governments in recent years. The United Nations urged dialogue and offered to facilitate talks, while the African Union stressed the importance of African-led solutions to security challenges. Privately, intelligence assessments in the U.S. pointed to the possibility that the depot attack and the intercepted convoy near the mining site were part of a coordinated effort to undermine Burkina Faso's economic and military capacity. If true, this would suggest an operation with both domestic and foreign actors, raising the stakes for any U.S. policy response. Within the American policy community, debate intensified. Some argued for engaging Traoré, directly offering conditional support tied to human rights and economic reforms. Others cautioned against deep involvement, warning that backing a leader accused by critics of consolidating power could backfire if public sentiment in Burkina Faso turned sharply against him. For the Burkinabe diaspora in the U.S., the news carried a personal weight. Community leaders held meetings in New York, Washington, and Houston, discussing ways to support relatives back home while urging American lawmakers to pay closer attention to the crisis. And yet, for all the statements and discussions, one question remained unanswered. Would the United States take concrete steps to influence the outcome in Burkina Faso? Or would it wait until events forced a decision? The answer to that question could determine not just the future of one West African nation, but the security landscape of the entire Sahel. If you believe that the decisions made in far-off capitals can change the fate of nations thousands of miles away, stay with this story, because what happens next may mark the start of a much larger crisis. The immediate danger may have passed for now, but the echoes of the depot attack and the intercepted convoy still reverberate across Burkina Faso and the wider Sahel. Intelligence reports suggest that other armed groups, possibly backed by external interests, remain active in the region. For a nation already grappling with insurgent violence, economic strain, and political uncertainty, the risk of further destabilization is high. If unrest spreads beyond Burkina Faso's borders, it could ignite a chain reaction in neighboring states, undermining the fragile security architecture of the entire Sahel. This is the crossroads where Ibrahim Traoré now stands. To his supporters, he represents a rare leader willing to challenge entrenched interests and put national sovereignty first. To his detractors, he is a risk-taker whose bold moves could invite more powerful adversaries into the conflict. The truth is that Burkina Faso's next steps will determine whether the country emerges stronger or slips deeper into instability. The broader implications are not lost on global powers. If the African military alliance fails to strengthen its coordination within the next 3 months, Burkina Faso could find itself standing alone, facing not just insurgent groups, but also geopolitical pressures it is ill-equipped to manage. History has shown that in moments like this, alliances can be tested, reshaped, or shattered altogether. And yet this is more than a geopolitical puzzle, it is a human story. It's about Mariam, the teacher, who wonders if her children will ever feel safe walking to school again. It's about Isa, the farmer who fears his harvest will rot before it reaches the market. It's about Adama, the miner, who knows that a single disruption can wipe out months of work and income. Their lives are the true measure of whether leadership decisions serve the people or merely the politics. So we must ask, is Ibrahim Traoré, The hope that Burkina Faso needs, or a gamble that could plunge the nation into greater peril? The answer will come not just from his actions, but from the resolve of a people who have endured hardship before and refuse to surrender their future. If this story has stirred something in you, if you believe in justice, dignity, and the rise of an Africa determined to chart its own course, let your thoughts be known. Let your prayers cross oceans. We will meet you again in the next chapter where the truth continues to speak. May God bless Africa, a land of strength, hope, and an unyielding will.